The afternoon sun blazed over the city, casting long shadows across the bustling streets. People hurried past one another, lost in their own worlds, some glued to their phones, others rushing to beat the traffic. In the middle of it all stood a young black girl, barely in her 20s, with a warm smile and eyes full of quiet determination. She worked at a small cafe near the financial district, serving coffee with a kindness that many customers barely noticed. But today would be different. Today, her life was about to change in a way she never expected. Across the street, a luxury car pulled up. Inside sat a wealthy businessman, a man who had built an empire from nothing. His sharp suit and expensive watch spoke of success, but his eyes carried a weight, a deep concern for his teenage son, who sat beside him in a wheelchair. The boy had been born with a rare condition that limited his mobility, and though his father could buy him anything material, he couldn't buy him true friendship or genuine kindness. As the businessman helped his son out of the car, the wheelchair's wheel caught on a crack in the pavement. The boy lurched forward, his arms flailing as he lost balance. Before his father could react, a blur of movement came from the cafe's entrance. The young girl had seen it all. Without hesitation, she dropped the tray she was holding and sprinted across the street. Just in time, she caught the boy before he hit the ground. "Whoa, easy there," she said, steadying him with a firm but gentle grip. "You okay?" The boy looked up at her, startled but unharmed. His father stood frozen for a second, his heart pounding. He had seen people ignore his son before, some out of discomfort, others out of indifference. But this stranger had rushed to help without a second thought. The girl knelt beside the wheelchair, adjusting it. "There, good as new," she said with a light chuckle. "You just gotta watch those sneaky pavement cracks, they're out to get us all." The boy laughed, a sound his father hadn't heard in months. The businessman finally found his voice. "Thank you," he said, his tone softer than he intended. "Most people wouldn't have bothered." The girl shrugged. "It's no big deal. Just being decent, you know." But to the father, it was a big deal. In that moment, he saw something rare, a person who acted not for money, not for recognition, but simply because it was the right thing to do. As she turned to leave, he called after her. "Wait, what's your name?" She paused, glancing back. "It's..." But before she could answer, a loud honk from a passing truck drowned out her words. The businessman frowned, but then his son tugged at his sleeve. "Dad," the boy said, his voice filled with excitement, "she's nice. Can we come back tomorrow?" The father looked at his son, then back at the girl, who was already walking away. A thought formed in his mind, one that would alter both their lives forever. The next morning, the girl returned to work as usual, unaware that her simple act of kindness had sparked something much bigger. The cafe buzzed with its regular crowd, office workers grabbing their morning coffee, students buried in textbooks, and the occasional tourist looking lost. She moved between tables with practiced ease, refilling cups and exchanging small talk. Meanwhile, across town, the wealthy businessman sat in his high-rise office, staring out at the city below. His mind kept replaying yesterday's scene, the way the girl had rushed to help his son without hesitation. He had spent years surrounded by people who only saw his money, his influence. But she hadn't even glanced at his car or his watch. She had only seen a person who needed help. His assistant knocked lightly on the door. "Sir, your 10 a.m. meeting is here." He waved a hand. "Reschedule it." The assistant blinked in surprise but nodded. "Of course. Is everything all right?" The businessman hesitated, then made a decision. "Actually, I need you to find someone for me." Back at the cafe, the girl wiped down the counter when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up, and froze. The businessman from yesterday stood there, dressed just as impeccably as before. But this time, he wasn't with his son. He was alone, scanning the room until his eyes landed on her. Her stomach tightened. Did I do something wrong yesterday? Before she could overthink it, he approached. You're here, he said, as if relieved. She forced a polite smile. Yeah. Can I get you something? He shook his head. No. I came to talk to you. The cafe suddenly felt too small. A few customers glanced their way, curious. She lowered her voice. Listen, if this is about yesterday, I really didn't do much. It's because of yesterday, he interrupted. Then, realizing how intense he sounded, he exhaled. Can we talk somewhere private? Her manager, an older woman with sharp eyes, had been watching. She gave a small nod. Go ahead, but be quick. The girl led him to a quiet corner booth. The businessman didn't waste time. I want to offer you a job. She blinked. A job? My son, he said, leaning forward slightly. He doesn't connect with people easily. But with you, it was different. She frowned. I just helped him up. That's it. That's not it, he said firmly. Most people either pity him or ignore him. You treated him like a person. She shifted uncomfortably. That's just how people should act. Exactly. His voice softened. And that's why I'm asking. I need someone like you in his life. A companion, a friend, someone who sees him for who he is. She opened her mouth, then closed it. This was insane. A complete stranger was offering her, what? A job as a friend? What exactly would I have to do? She asked cautiously. Spend time with him. Take him places, museums, parks, whatever he enjoys. Help him feel normal. He paused. And of course, you'd be paid well for it. She almost laughed. You don't even know me. I know enough. He reached into his pocket and slid a business card across the table. Think about it. The pay is triple what you make here. Full benefits. Flexible hours. Her breath caught. Triple? She glanced down at the card, his name, his company, all the proof that this was real. But something still felt off. Why me? She asked. You could hire anyone, a professional caregiver, a tutor. Because, he said simply, he liked you. The weight of his words settled between them. The girl stared at the card, her mind racing. This could change everything. But it could also be a mistake. The businessman stood. No pressure. Just, call me if you're interested. And with that, he walked out, leaving her with a choice that could alter her future. The girl stared at the business card long after the man had left, her fingers tracing the embossed letters. Triple the pay. Full benefits. The words played on a loop in her mind. She had grown up knowing the weight of every dollar, the way bills piled up faster than paychecks, the way, saving for a rainy day, felt like a joke when every day was a storm. But this? This was more than money. This was a door swinging open to a life she'd never imagined. And that scared her. Her tiny apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car horn outside. She sat cross-legged on her bed, the business card placed carefully on her nightstand like it might disappear if she looked away. Her phone buzzed. A text from her older brother. You good? You seemed off earlier. She hesitated, then typed back. Some rich guy offered me a job today. Like, a really good one. 3 dots appeared immediately. Scam. She rolled her eyes. No, like, he was legit. His kid's disabled. Wants me to hang out with him. A pause. Then. You gonna do it? That was the question, wasn't it? She thought about the boy in the wheelchair, his surprised laugh when she joked about the pavement. The way his father had looked at her, not with pity or condescension, but with something like hope. She picked up the card again. Then she dialed the number. A sleek car pulled up in front of her apartment building. The girl, now dressed in clean jeans and a simple blouse, her usual cafe uniform left behind, took a deep breath before stepping out. The businessman got out to greet her. "You came." She nodded. "Yeah. But let's be clear, if this gets weird, I walk." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Fair enough." The drive to his home was quiet. Too quiet. She watched the city blur past, her stomach tightening with every mile. What was she doing? She wasn't a caregiver. She wasn't trained for this. What if the kid hated her? What if? The car slowed. Her thoughts screeched to a halt. The house wasn't just a house. It was an estate, manicured lawns, a fountain, windows so tall they seemed to touch the sky. The businessman glanced at her. "Don't look so nervous. He's just a kid." "You live here," she muttered. "Of course you're not nervous." He actually laughed at that. The boy, his name was Daniel, she learned, was in the sunroom, bent over a sketchbook. He looked up when they entered, and his face lit up. "You're back." The girl blinked. "You, remember me?" "Of course." Daniel rolled his wheelchair closer. "You're the one who didn't treat me like I'm made of glass." Something in her chest loosened. The businessman cleared his throat. "I'll let you two get acquainted." And with that, he left. Awkward silence. Daniel broke it first. "So. My dad bribed you to hang out with me, huh?" She choked on air. "What? He does that?" Daniel shrugged. "Last time it was a chess tutor who just happened to love the same video games as me." She stared at him. Then, despite herself, she laughed. "Okay, first of all, your dad didn't bribe me. He offered me a job. Big difference." Daniel grinned. Second of all. She plopped onto the couch beside him. "If we're gonna do this, we're doing it my way. No fake bonding. No forced fun. Deal?" Daniel held out a fist. "Deal." She bumped it. And just like that, the tension shattered. The businessman stood in the doorway, unnoticed. His son was laughing, really laughing, as the girl animatedly described her worst cafe customer ever. And then he licked the spoon and asked for a new one. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel empty. He slipped away before they could see him. But he was smiling. The girl, now officially Daniel's companion, though the title still felt strange, showed up the next morning with a backpack slung over one shoulder and a determined glint in her eye. Daniel was waiting in the grand foyer, his wheelchair positioned like he'd been there a while. "You're late," he said, but there was a smirk tugging at his lips. She checked her phone. "By, 2 minutes. In this house, that's basically a crime." She snorted. "Guess I'll have to live on the edge." A housekeeper hovered nearby, eyeing her backpack. "Will you be needing lunch prepared, miss?" "Oh. No thanks," she said, patting her bag. "I brought snacks." Daniel's eyebrows shot up. "You brought food? Into this house? What, rich people don't eat granola bars?" He grinned. "Where are we going?" She matched his grin. "Somewhere your dad would hate." 20 minutes later, they were wedged into a crowded city bus, Daniel's wheelchair securely anchored in the designated space. He looked around with wide eyes. "I haven't been on one of these since I was a kid," he admitted. She blinked. "Seriously? Dad thinks they're unsafe." He made air quotes. She rolled her eyes. Yeah, well, today we're slumming it. Their destination? A hole-in-the-wall arcade she'd loved since high school, the kind with sticky floors, flickering lights, and a prize counter where the best items had been out of stock since 2012. Daniel took it all in like it was Disneyland. This, he declared, is awesome. She dumped a pile of tokens into his lap. Prove it. Beat me at air hockey and I'll buy you a slushie. You're on. It wasn't all smooth sailing. Halfway through their third game, Daniel's arm spasmed, a side effect of his condition, sending the paddle clattering to the ground. His face shuddered instantly. We can go, he muttered. She pretended not to notice the frustration in his voice. Nah. You're just saying that, 'cause I'm winning. He glared at her. I'm serious. So am I. She bent down, grabbed the paddle, and plopped it back into his hand. Your move, rich kid. For a second, he looked like he might snap at her. Then, slowly, his grip tightened. The game resumed. He lost. She bought him the slushie anyway. Later, perched on a bench outside the arcade, Daniel spun the straw in his drink. Most people treat me like I'll break. She kicked her feet up on the railing. Most people are boring. My last tutor cried when I dropped a pencil. That's kinda pathetic. He laughed, but it faded quickly. Dad means well. He just doesn't get that I don't want the perfect life. I want this. He gestured to the bustling street, the cracked pavement, the smell of hot pretzels from a nearby cart. She studied him. So tell him. It's not that easy. Sure it is. She shrugged. You just say, hey Dad, stop being a control freak. Daniel choked on his slushie. I am not saying that. Then I will. He went still. You'd really do that? She met his eyes. Someone's gotta have your back, right? For the first time, Daniel looked at her like she wasn't just hired help. Like she was a friend. The businessman was waiting when they got back, his expression unreadable. Daniel wheeled forward before she could speak. Dad. We need to talk. Her eyebrows shot up. Well, damn. As father and son disappeared into the study, the housekeeper sidled up to her. He's never stood up to his father before. She smiled. Guess there's a first time for everything. The businessman's study door clicked shut behind Daniel, leaving the girl standing awkwardly in the hallway. She could hear the low murmur of voices through the wood, Daniel's steady tone, his father's occasional interjections. The housekeeper had vanished, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She wandered into the kitchen, where a massive stainless steel fridge hummed softly. Opening it, she was met with rows of perfectly arranged organic juices, artisanal cheeses, and pre-portioned meals. Of course. She grabbed a sparkling water, twisting the cap off with a hiss. A throat cleared behind her. She spun, nearly dropping the bottle. The businessman stood in the doorway, his tie loosened and his expression unreadable. He wants to go back to that arcade, he said without preamble. She swallowed. And I said yes. She blinked. That was easier than expected. The man sighed, running a hand through his hair. He also told me to stop being a control freak. A laugh burst out of her before she could stop it. Damn. Kid's got guts. To her surprise, the businessman's mouth twitched. He's never spoken to me like that before. She leaned against the counter. Maybe he just needed someone to remind him he could. The room fell quiet. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked loudly. Finally, the businessman met her eyes. What's your rate at the cafe? $15 an hour? He pulled out his checkbook. I'm doubling your salary. Her jaw dropped. What? Consider it hazard pay, he said dryly. Since you're clearly a bad influence. She was still staring at the check when he walked out. The girl had settled into a rhythm, mornings at the mansion, afternoons exploring the city with Daniel, evenings listening to him excitedly recount their adventures to his father over dinner. Today's mission? A comic book convention. Daniel had spent the entire ride there vibrating with excitement. They've got an original Spider-Man #1 on display, he said, adjusting the Captain America shield strapped to his wheelchair. She grinned. Nerd. Says the girl who cried when her favorite character died in Infinity War. I did not cry. The argument died the second they rolled into the convention center. Daniel's face lit up like Christmas morning as he took in the sea of cosplayers, vendors, and life-sized superhero cutouts. For hours, they lost themselves in the chaos, meeting artists, debating story arcs, even getting photobombed by a guy in a surprisingly good Deadpool costume. It was perfect. Until it wasn't. They were heading toward the food court when a group of teens, loud, laughing, not watching where they were going, barged past. One of them clipped Daniel's wheelchair, sending it lurching sideways. The girl reacted instantly, grabbing the handles to steady him. Hey! Watch it! The teen who'd bumped them turned, took one look at Daniel, and sneered. Relax, it's not like he felt it. Daniel flinched. Something inside her snapped. Before she could think, she'd stepped between them. Apologize. The teen laughed. Or what? She didn't raise her voice. Didn't blink. Or I'll make sure every person in this building knows you're the kind of loser who bullies disabled kids. A crowd had started to gather. The teen's face flushed. Whatever. Freak. He stomped off, his friends trailing behind. Daniel exhaled shakily. You didn't have to do that. She turned to him. Yes, I did. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Then Daniel nodded, his shoulders squaring. Can we get nachos now? She grinned. Hell yeah. Back at the mansion, Daniel was unusually quiet during dinner. His father noticed instantly. Everything all right? Daniel hesitated. Then, slowly, he recounted what had happened. The businessman's knuckles whitened around his fork. I'll have their passes revoked. Ban them from future. Dad. Daniel cut him off. It's handled. The man looked to the girl. She gave a tiny shrug. Kid's tougher than you think. Something unspoken passed between father and son. Then, to her shock, the businessman nodded. Later, as she gathered her things to leave, he stopped her at the door. Thank you, he said quietly. She paused. For what? For seeing him the way I sometimes forget to. The raw honesty in his voice caught her off guard. Before she could respond, he cleared his throat. Oh, and you're invited to the gala next week. She choked. The what now? He smirked. Black tie. Don't be late. As his car pulled away, she stood frozen on the steps, one thought screaming in her head. What the hell do I wear to a gala? The girl stood in front of her closet, staring at the meager selection of clothes like they might magically transform into something black tie appropriate. She held up a wrinkled black dress she'd worn to a cousin's wedding 3 years ago. The hem was slightly frayed. Nope. Her phone buzzed. Daniel. Don't freak out, but Dad sent a car for you. And a dress. And a stylist. She blinked. A what? Just go with it. An hour later, she was sitting in a luxury boutique, a team of stylists circling her like she was some kind of science experiment. One held up a deep emerald gown. This would complement your skin tone beautifully, the stylist said. She swallowed. How much is it? The woman waved a hand. Mr. Kensington is covering all expenses. Of course he was. She slipped into the dress, staring at her reflection. The girl in the mirror looked different. Elegant. Like she belonged in a world of galas and chandeliers. Who even am I right now? The car pulled up to a glittering high-rise, valets swarming like well-dressed ants. Inside, the gala was in full swing, crystal glasses clinking, orchestra music floating through the air, women in diamonds laughing like wind chimes. Then she saw him. The businessman stood near the entrance, scanning the crowd. When his eyes landed on her, something flickered in his expression. Surprise? Approval? You clean up nice, he said as she approached. She smoothed the dress self-consciously. Yeah, well, don't get used to it. Daniel wheeled up beside them, grinning. Told you she wouldn't bolt. The businessman arched a brow. There was a chance of bolting? Always, she deadpanned. A server passed with champagne flutes. She reached for one just as a sharp voice cut through the crowd. Darling, you didn't tell me we were hiring guests now. A woman in a silver gown slithered up, her smile as warm as an IRS audit. The businessman's jaw tightened. Clarissa, this is my son's companion. Companion, this is my ex-wife. Ah. The dragon lady. Clarissa's gaze raked over her. How quaint. Daniel rolled his eyes. Ignore her. She's just mad Dad didn't name a yacht after her. Clarissa's smile turned venomous. And how is school, Daniel? Still in that special program? The air turned to ice. Before anyone could react, the girl stepped forward, champagne flute dangling carelessly between her fingers. Oops, she said loudly, and accidentally dumped the entire glass down Clarissa's designer gown. Gasps. A beat of horrified silence. Then Daniel lost it, laughing so hard he nearly tipped his wheelchair. Even the businessman's lips twitched. Clarissa turned purple. You little. Terribly sorry, the girl said sweetly. I'm just so clumsy. Must be all this special champagne. As Clarissa stormed off, the businessman leaned in. That was a $20,000 dress. She shrugged. Worth every penny. For the first time in years, the man laughed, real, unfiltered laughter that made a few heads turn. Daniel grinned. Told you she'd fit right in. Later, as the orchestra played a waltz, the businessman surprised her by offering his hand. Don't make it weird, she muttered, but let him lead her to the floor. You're terrible at this, he observed as she stepped on his shoes. And yet you're still alive. A pause. Then, quietly, thank you. For Daniel. For tonight. She met his eyes. For once, the billionaire looked almost human. Yeah, well. Someone's gotta keep you rich people in line. The music swelled. Somewhere across the ballroom, Daniel was challenging a stuffy CEO to a wheelchair race. And for the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider. She felt like family. The girl woke to her phone buzzing violently across her nightstand. She squinted at the screen. 3:17 a.m. Daniel's name flashed with an incoming call. Her stomach dropped. Hello? A stranger's voice answered. Ma'am, this is Metro General. You're listed as Daniel Kensington's emergency contact. She was out the door before they finished the sentence. The businessman was already there when she arrived, his usually immaculate suit wrinkled, eyes bloodshot. He stood frozen outside a hospital room, staring through the glass like the world had ended. Inside, Daniel lay unconscious, wires snaking from his arms, a ventilator tube taped to his mouth. What happened? Her voice came out ragged. The businessman didn't turn. Seizure. They think his medication levels, his voice broke. A doctor approached, clipboard in hand. We need to discuss next steps. The girl stepped forward. Is he going to be okay? The doctor hesitated. That 1 second of pause told her everything. We're transferring him to Switzerland. The businessman paced the private waiting room like a caged animal. There's a specialist there. You can't just yank him across the world. I can't lose him. The roar echoed off the walls. For a heartbeat, the billionaire facade cracked, revealing raw terror beneath. She stood her ground. He needs stability right now, not some experimental. You don't get a vote. His voice turned icy. You're just the help. The words hung between them like a slap. She recoiled. Yeah. I guess I am. Turning on her heel, she walked out, past the hushed nurses, the blinking machines, the room where a boy who'd become her friend might be dying. 3 days passed. She ignored Daniel's texts. Deleted the businessman's calls. Threw herself into double shifts at the cafe, scrubbing counters until her hands were raw. It was better this way. She'd been stupid to think. Miss? She spun. Daniel's housekeeper stood in the cafe doorway, wringing her hands. He's asking for you. Daniel was propped up in bed when she arrived, pale but awake. The businessman was nowhere in sight. Took you long enough, Daniel croaked. She folded her arms. Your dad fired me, remember? He didn't mean it. He said it. Daniel sighed, then winced at the movement. Look, he's scared. When Mom left, it was just us. He swallowed hard. He doesn't know how to be alone. The girl exhaled slowly. Where is he? Roof. Smoking cigars like a cliché. She found him on the hospital's rooftop garden, staring at the skyline. Switzerland's off, he said without turning. She blinked. What changed your mind? You did. He finally faced her, eyes hollow. You were right. I was running. A gust of wind whipped between them. She stepped closer. He's tougher than you think. I know. His voice cracked. I just don't know how to do this without you. The admission hung in the air, fragile as the hospital glow below. She took the cigar from his shaking fingers, stubbed it out. Good thing you don't have to. Sunlight streamed through Daniel's hospital room when the doctor came in with test results. Levels are stabilizing. No travel needed, we can handle this here. The businessman sagged in relief. Daniel grinned. Told you. Later, as they left together, the businessman hesitated at the car. The job, if you want it back. She shook her head. His face fell. I don't want the job, she said, climbing into the passenger seat. But I'll stick around. You know. For the kid. For the first time in days, the businessman smiled. And as the car pulled away, she realized something terrifying. She'd accidentally found a family.